Good evening. I am Aphrodite Salas, journalist and assistant professor in the Department of Journalism at Concordia University. I was in a community radio trailer in Inukjuak, Nunavik, the Arctic region of Quebec. I had brought 3 journalism students with me. Inukjuak is on the eastern tip of Hudson Bay, about 1,500 kilometers north of Montreal, or 5 or 6 hours by plane, depending on the weather. We went to learn from Inuit climate leaders, Sarah Lisa Kasudluak, Erica Tegotalik, Tommy Palliser, and others, and to collaboratively share their story of building the very first hydro project in Arctic Quebec. So Eric had suggested we be guests on the radio on the first night to introduce ourselves, explain what we were doing, and to take calls. So you can imagine in a flying community of 1,800 people, word gets around pretty fast when there are new folks there. And on that night, there was a terrible snowstorm. Winds of almost 100 kilometers per hour whipped at the windows. It was very dark outside and very cold. We huddled around a microphone with Alicina Luktruk, our translator. And it was all going well until a caller asked, "You're a teacher, right?" And I said yes, and something inside me in that moment told me that her response was going to be tough. It was. She said, "My teachers did very bad things to me at my residential school. I hate teachers." And I remember freezing up inside. My students were beside me. The translator was looking at me. I didn't know what to say. So I said, "I'm sorry." And that moment is like one of those moments that you know you'll carry with you to your grave buried in your heart, a moment that changes things. I'm here to share my story and to invite you to look at the world in perhaps what might be a different way. My work at Concordia is largely about responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Call to Action 86 that tells journalism educators that we can and must do better, that generations of journalists have caused great harm to Indigenous peoples by using racist, negative stereotypes time and time again, to stop the practice of parachuting in and out of their communities and of practicing extractive journalism. So along with others and hand in hand with Indigenous partners, I want to do better, and I want to train my students to do better as well. So my research is about working together to find a better way of doing journalism. I explore collaborative methods of journalism as well as principles of conciliatory journalism, a method developed by Finnish researchers that focuses on how we report during times of social polarization. So what does this mean? It means, to me, building long-term reciprocal relationships that are built on trust between Indigenous communities, journalism students, and journalists. It means asking myself every time I start a new relationship with a community, what's in it for them? It means asking for permission from community leaders to work towards those relationships long before we ever set foot on their land. I traveled to Inukjuak in November of 2021, but that relationship started almost 2 years before. After introductions through my research partner, Chris Henderson, at Indigenous Clean Energy. We've worked together on multiple projects since 2018, and along with my colleague, Darryl Brown at Kisset Clean Energy, I have new ones planned through to 2026. So each project involves an Indigenous community that is showing climate leadership in amazing ways, either through a groundbreaking project or a new technology. Answering Call to Action 86 in a way that focuses on the strength of Indigenous communities feels right to me, because as much as this work is about building for a better future, it's also about acknowledging the damage done in the past. And that's why each of my students on my teams must undergo extensive long-term training before visiting communities. They learn about what journalists have done wrong and how a renewed focus on building these reciprocal relationships based on trust might eventually make things go right. And they want to do this work. More than 60 students applied to be part of my 3-student team to Inukjuak back in 2021. And those 3 students have gone on to really wonderful things. Luca Caruso Moro is a journalist and multimedia reporter at CTV Montreal. Virginie Anne moved to the Yukon and is now a journalist at CBC Whitehorse. And Carrie Aquash is a filmmaker, and he just graduated from Concordia with his MA in journalism. So far, I've worked with 9 students to share the stories of 2 incredible communities, Gull Bay First Nation, Kiashke Zagiginish led by Chief Wilfred King, Councillor Kevin King, 2020 Catalysts, AJ Esquega, and Darryl Brown. Back in 2018, they were the first to build a solar power microgrid with lithium batteries in a remote community. And our story with Inuit climate leaders in Inukjuak is all about vision, building the first hydro facility in Arctic Quebec that will replace diesel for heat and power by 100%. Amazing. Doing the journalism in a mindful way is one part of the work, but taking care to share the stories responsibly is just as important. So in Inukjuak, we produced 2 short documentaries and a multimedia website. One documentary is called Simeoni Nilukturuk, in his own words, and it features the respected elder as he talks about residential schools, the police-sanctioned killing of Inuit sled dogs, and the forced relocation of his people to the high Arctic in the 50s. That project was particularly meaningful because Simeoni passed away just a few months after we shot his interview. We worked with his widow, Alicina Lukturuk, to make sure we got it right. I screened it privately with her before showing anyone else and asked her blessing to share it. The second documentary, named Inuvik, shares the story of a vibrant, resilient community charting their own path forward, moving away from diesel with bright plans for the future. And when it came time to launch, we organized a world premiere at the local high school in Nunavik and invited those featured in Inuvik and Alice Simoni's widow to speak and share their thoughts, first at home. The next day, we published both docs along with an extensive multimedia website on CTV, and in the weeks to follow, Inuvik was screened by Indigenous Clean Energy at the UN Climate Conference, COP27 in Egypt. And when Canada Pavilion organizers invited us to screen at COP15, we did it together, with the Inuit climate leaders featured in the film, with our partner from Indigenous Clean Energy, with my students, all on stage, side by side. This work is very slow, which is not typical of journalism these days, but I feel that's what's needed. A slow, thoughtful, introspective process that requires a healthy dose of intellectual and emotional humility. I'm not the only one to do this work, but as one of my Indigenous mentors has told me countless times, together we are stronger. I like to believe that. Thank you.